Do you feel like progress is being made within the scientific community in the sense of like, are you seeing more diversity? I mean, even just gender diversity.
In my time here, I'm not sure. I've seen it in small ways. I've definitely seen individual programs that have upped diversity. I mean, I worked with a group that was founded at UChicago, and you should absolutely interview some of the people who made this group because it's incredible. And they did all these grassroots efforts to try to increase diversity and inclusion within the grad population.
Wasn't that one of your friends that you introduced me to the other night on Zoom?
Yeah,
we definitely need to get her on the show. Her pronouns are she, her, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, just wanted to double check.
Yep.
But yeah.
Add her to the list. Get her on the board. Sign her up.
She does a ton of other work, not just with that group, but also like at UChicago writ large and in other places to work on diversity in the entire university. And that's, so you should talk to her about that, because I'm going to be able to give sort of a poor version of what she could tell you about this. But I don't want to sound too cynical. I don't know that I've necessarily witnessed things getting better. I've definitely seen like some really incredible efforts from students and some professors and faculty and things like this too. I just think the institution is so big and so dense in a lot of academic places that it can be really challenging. Like I've watched job searches happen and they're pretty transparent about it, which I think is probably good. Like maybe it's actually better in academics than other places. And I just haven't seen like the worst version of this. But I've seen like job searches where they're like, we're trying to recruit a diverse candidate. And then they interview 5 white men. And I'm like, I don't understand what we've done here.
Yeah. Like define your diversity if you didn't have a single woman, a single person of color, anyone who is like gender non-binary or like gender queer in some capacity, or like anyone who is like minoritized in any capacity. You just have.
Is that a word? Minoritized? That's the first time I've heard it. That's cool. It's a cool word. You don't gotta get all angry with me. I've never heard the word before.
No, I'm not
Don't
getting.
give me that look.
I'm not getting angry. I'm trying to think if I just like came up with that, or if that I feel like I've heard
minoritized. Interesting.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard that word before. I feel like I didn't just come up with that. I might have just come up with that. At this point, I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, wine has happened. But
I suppose I could say on the record while we're here that I don't think that this problem is specific to my university. I'm not speaking about specifically mine. I think this is a problem.
Oh yeah,
that is universal to.
All 100%.
Well, I think that this is just universal to higher learning in general, because like, as we already know, that higher learning, the way that it is designed and the way that it's set up, both through standardized testing and through tuition fees, are like meant in every capacity to keep minorities, especially Black and brown minorities, out of higher university, like higher education in general. So it's not that like we're talking about any one campus that's like, oh, well, this one campus is actually not great. Because like, obviously, if you're like at Brown or Howard, you're going to have a lot more diversity in the people. But like, that's like a historically Black campus. Yeah. Like that's different than if you had a place like NYU, where NYU is hilariously expensive, especially if you're coming from out of state. So even if you have the SAT scores, which you have to pay money to take the SATs, you have to pay money to take the ACTs, and those standardized tests, the way they are set up, are absolutely set up in a hilariously racist way, and are geared towards white people to be able to pass those tests. So even if you are able to get the scores to get into NYU, you, like most minority families across the board, aren't going to be able to afford sending their kid to NYU, and so are going to be more likely to send them in state, or going to be more likely to send them to a community college, at least until they can afford to send them or get a scholarship to NYU. So like the disenfranchisement of minorities starts before you even get to campus.
Absolutely.
So by the time you actually get to campus, the disenfranchisement within the facilities in campus is almost lessened, because like once you're already there, they're like, oh my God, you're a minority. We absolutely want to get you into this program because we want to show diversity in our program.
Right.
But getting to that campus to get into that program, you're already jumping through so many more hurdles.
So, I mean, that's the problem. But I think that it's important to also talk about like how is this affecting society at large as a result of not having a diverse enough perspective within these programs. And I think that that's the kind of message that we really need to try to spread and to get to resonate with people, to recognize that like when you don't have the right level of diversity, you end up hampering your ability to learn about the world and as a society, your ability to do the right science. And that's why I think it's so interesting to hear from you, you know, and in your perspective on like, you know, we have to be careful about like how we do the science, who's doing the science, what type of people we're studying, and what that tells us about, you know, the information that we're able to get as a result of it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, but I do want to get to that, but I want to real quick go back to what Alicia was saying, because I think that that's really important. And we talk about it as sort of like, I'm sure you've heard this term before, but the leaky pipeline, where like you lose diversity, not at the level of graduate school, but you lose it all along the way to get there, you know, like even to get, you know, not even just the cost of taking the SATs, but like if you're not going to as good of a school, if you don't go to a private school that teaches you how to like go to the SAT classes and all of these things, like you lose people. And then when you get into these institutions, you're right, like maybe there's a little bit less because people are stoked to have like their one person who is diversity at their school. But then you have to do all the extra labor of like, you're the one person of diversity at this school. And now everyone wants you to
so you either take on the role of being the token, or you take on the role of speaking for your minority as a whole, which, as we know, Black people and like all minorities in general aren't a fucking monolith.
Yeah.
So if you're like the one brown person in the room, everyone's going to look to you and be like, oh, cool. So here's this thing. Is this racist? Is it okay if I say this? Are you cool with this thing? And it's like, you then have to become an expert not only on whatever it is that you're studying, but then you also have to become an expert on race and race politics and race dynamics, because you have to now start teaching all of the people around you, because you've been either tokenized or you've become their only go-to of information, where they feel like, oh, well, you're the only Black friend I have, so I have to ask you all of the questions that I have to ask you because you're the only Black friend I know. So you have to answer all of the questions for me and you have no other options.
Which I would argue is also definitely tokenizing. Like,
oh, 1,000%. I mean, like it's two different sides of the token coin. Like you either become whitewashed as the token and you're just like, I'm just one of you, which was me growing up, or you flip the coin and become, I am the voice of an entire fucking people, which most of the people that I am speaking for, like, we don't all agree on a variety of things. Like if you just like look at the Black community, we don't all agree on fucking Kanye. Like, that's just like one thing. And like, you would think that that would be really easy to agree. Like, okay, well, Kanye's out here saying some fuck shit. So like, we should all agree that like, we should throw his stupid ass out at this point. Oh, no. But like, Kanye makes really good music. He's such a great artist. And like, we have to like, he's gone through some shit ever since his mom died. He's gone through some shit. No, he was a goddamn like textbook narcissist. He was a narcissist before his mom died. He was a narcissist after his mom died. We don't have to give him shit. But like, of course, within the Black community, there is not any sort of like monolithic voice, because that is what happens with minorities. So when you are tokenized in that capacity, you're just like, oh, cool. So I have to speak for an entire minority and there's no real consensus on this. But now I have to do a whole bunch of research to make sure that I don't speak out of turn, or like, I'm just going to go along with whatever my white friends say so that they keep inviting me to parties. Like, it's too like, it's either or. And especially in a campus world, that can be really fucking tough because you stand out so much.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're doing all that extra work, right? And so at this point, the levels of diversity we have now, you know, our diverse community is taking on all of these extra roles in addition to trying to be students and researchers and doing, you know, like I am at my wit's end just trying to get through this PhD, and I am not being forced to take on as many extra roles as a lot of students I work next to. And so like, we're not even getting to have the advantages, like you're saying, of having a more sort of diverse community of researchers lending their perspectives, because honestly, like all of us are just trying to get by at this point.
Right.
And so, you know, it's not until we increase that. And one of the things that like really struck me recently that somebody said to me is that I think a lot of people, and this extends to sort of all areas of diversity, to women in science, to queer people in science, to everything, is that like, there's sort of this almost like competitive urge that people will get. I see this a lot with especially white women in science, of like, well, like we acknowledge that science can be sexist, but like if you're the best, you're still going to get a job. And it becomes this weird competition. And it's like, I want to get to the point where we have some fucking mediocrity. Like I see so many mediocre white men get these positions, and like, just let us be mediocre for once. Like, don't be like, you have to be the best goddamn woman scientist there's ever been, and then you'll succeed.
Or go back to being a housewife. Like those are your options. You either are the best or you're a housewife. And it's like, but I mean, there's so many like mediocre white men who are doing the barely passable jobs that like I am doing a better job at already and can do a better job at, but because I'm a woman, I can't take their place because he's a man. And like, what the fuck?
Like, don't get me wrong, there are some incredible, unbelievable, best of all women in science. I mean, we were talking about CRISPR, so Jennifer Doudna, Manuel Charpentier just won the Nobel. Amazing women in science. But listen, I just want to be fucking average sometimes. Like, I want to be like, I want to, for once in my life, get a C on something, or just fail an experiment and not have to like lose all faith in myself as a human. Like,
how diverse is the Nobel Prize? Nobel?
I don't know. My guess would be that it's not very.
Right.
I think it's more diverse between gender and not between race.
Yeah.
You know what's really funny to do in my university, and probably in most, is that like the hospital that we have here has like a hallway where they have like framed pictures of like the classes of years gone by for like you can go back to like 1903, like whenever UChicago was founded, I suppose. And you can walk, and as you walk down the hallway, because I work part-time in like the hospital lab spaces, and as you walk up, you just watch as more and more faces become women, and you start to wait until you see any faces that aren't white, and you just sort of like, oh, like, I suppose things are getting better. Like the earliest ones are just
yes, there's the two not white faces. Wonderful, wonderful.
So there's obviously the importance of fairness, but what are the other reasons why that diversity is so important?
Well, I just think like I mean, like we talked about earlier with the complexity and the danger and the ethical quandaries that you get into with stuff, you know, genetically speaking. I think if you don't have people that are coming from a perspective that can actively be harmed, I mean, this sucks to say because everyone should advocate for everyone, but I think when you're from communities that are going to actively be harmed, you obviously advocate a lot harder, and you don't have to look a lot farther to see that than like the past election, where a fucking ton of the heavy lifting of advocacy and grassroots effort were done by the communities most likely to be really adversely affected by another Trump term. And so I think, you know, for example, like I have a huge problem with like people trying to do like GWAS on sexuality, and I have concerns about how they frame those studies. So the one that I was talking about, and it was run by a lot of people who weren't necessarily geneticists, but they had like sort of like psychologist backgrounds, I believe, which I already think is a little bit scary because we're straying onto the grounds of like sexuality as like an issue of psychology. But also like they defined sexuality in such a bizarre binary way. Like it was like straight or had any gay experience was their binary variable. And you don't have to do that, but if you don't, you know, like a lot of these tools to do these genetic analysis are so easy to access. Like, I mean, you guys could probably pretty easily find some online and like run them yourself. And you know, I think if we're not careful about that, don't think exactly about how these things are going to come out, like that's a little scary. And I think like if you have more diverse people, like I wanted just one queer person on that team to be like, yo, this is a weird ass way to define sexuality. Like what
Right.
you can run BWAS on traits that are not binary. Like you could choose to have a spectrum trait and they chose not to do that. Like
Right.
And it takes somebody who actually has life experience in these issues to be able to point that out. And if you don't have somebody like that in the room, you're simply not doing your work correctly. And you don't even have the ability to know that you're missing out on something because you don't have somebody in the room who can point it out to you.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
and
the
that's
same way-
just about like catching the problems, right? But there's also like the things that you study and, you know, the questions that you ask. And I think, and I mean, you should check me on this because I haven't checked this recently, but people have done studies about like various like increasing diversities of groups and like the type of results those groups put out. And it's generally considered to be true that the more diverse backgrounds your group has, like the more success that you have with any given problem because you have different perspectives. Like you think about things differently. You can see.
Wait, that's actual research that's been done?
People have done this research. I've seen like, this is why I don't want to cite this because I don't know the article, but I've seen like the cover of Nature that had some people with a canoe. I don't remember the study, but I have like an image in my brain, so I'll find it.
I need to look into that. Yeah, I need to look into that. That's amazing because I have just a larger theory in general that diversity is important. Like just not even looking at human beings, but when you look at for example, diversity within populations. Whenever any population becomes too homogenous, it loses its ability to kind of discover new things and to be able to progress. And you end up stagnating. And diversity, just from a general perspective, is what gives you these like trial and error things on the edges where it's like people are learning new things here and they're trying new things there. And then you can kind of integrate that into the larger experience that everybody has if you're able to have people branching out in different ways. And as soon as you make things homogenous, you end up limiting the system as a whole from its ability to kind of discover the best ways to, engage with the world. And I'd love to see research that kind of shows that that's true because it's something I kind of feel innately, but it's not necessarily something that everybody feels innately. So
I mean, speaking, it's certainly the case, right?
100%.
You need a level of diversity within a population for evolution to occur. If you have a homogeneous population, you need things to go wrong, you need things to go right, you need changes, and a big thing.
Do you know what the number is?
What number?
When it comes to a human population, like let's say you're going to take a group of humans and send them off into space. How many people do you need for them to be able to survive long-term and have genetic diversity?
I have no idea, but I think that would very much depend on the initial diversity of the population you sent. If you sent 5 white people, I think you'd have some problems.
Right? But are we talking like 1,000 people, like 500? Do we know?
I mean, you don't need that many, obviously. I think there's some theories to suggest that like the initial founding of the Americas could have been a population of less than 20. I mean, you can found a population, but Native Americans are one of the most genetically similar populations on the planet.
Yeah, that's right.
To settle out of Africa. So it sort of depends on the diversity that you want. You start with what's sort of called standing variation, and the amount of standing variation is going to determine how quickly you can change. So something we talk about in genetics is that you can adapt much faster if you have more standing variation in your population. So imagine like, this isn't really true, John, because unfortunately you and me probably share a lot of genetic diversity because we are both white people. But I mean, imagine the three of us have a fair bit of genetic diversity. That doesn't really do anything for us. There are a lot of differences between our genomes that don't make a difference. They don't really affect how we live our lives. They don't have any sort of effect on phenotype that matters in this context. But let's say all of a sudden we're forced into a new weird situation, like we all go live on Mars. And there's something about Mars, like the slight change in gravity, the slight change in atmospheric concentration that affects us in such a way that all of a sudden, like this one allele that Alicia has, but we don't, becomes really advantageous. Then, let's assume that now we're a much larger population and, half of those people have the allele that Alicia has, but half of them don't. Having that already there makes us able to evolve a lot faster because like the sort of traditional way we think about evolution is you go over many, 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 many generations. Then at some point, some mutation happens and it's lucky and it happens to be in that right place. But you have to go through so many goddamn generations and humans live a long time. And so like the odds of like populations surviving that are small, if you have to wait for that to happen, are pretty low, depending on how
Interesting.
strong the pressure is. So obviously you're going to do better as a small population if you have a good amount of standing variation, so that at least somebody is going to maybe have something that's useful in that context.
That makes sense.
So yeah, certainly genetically that's true, and you can sort of generalize it and make the claim that, yeah, like you can imagine in people that would be true too. Like if you have enough diversity of perspectives and all of a sudden we're thrown into a new situation, like, oh, I don't know, if fucking dictatorship happens to America, which, oh, imagine that could happen, then having a diversity of opinions could be extremely useful.
Right. So, and that's what we're talking, like from a general perspective here. Like diversity is important in order to enable a system or a grouping of organisms to be able to survive changes in environment or to be able to thrive in conditions that you can't predict.
Yeah,
the more diversity you have, as the conditions change, the more likely you're going to be able to have some subset of your larger group that's able to handle that.
Yeah, better. And there have been theories of human evolution that suggest that was sort of the reason that humans were able to survive and thrive, because we're not very good predators. Like if you think of us sort of innately as like an animal, there's not really a lot we bring to the table. Like especially if you look at other primates, we're much weaker than most other great apes.
And yet we've somehow kicked all their asses.
We really can't survive without clothing and things like this in most environments. But the thing that we have that they don't is very large and complex brains and complex societies and complex diversity of people and opinions and ways of doing things. And so there's a thought that like humans evolved in this rapidly changing landscape. There was a lot more volcanic activity at the time. There was a lot of things, there was ice ages, a lot of things were changing. And so the ability to sort of adapt from sort of just like a mental level or just being able to change and rapidly. Humans populate some of the most diverse environments on the planet. Like most animal populations don't do that, especially given how like closely related we are. We're not like separate populations of humans living in the Arctic and the islands of the Caribbean. Like we are really similar.
Right.
And so we have this sort of ability of mind, of ideas, of cultural development that allow us to do this. And, that's maybe why we've become the dominant, at least mammal on the planet.
So what you're trying to say is that humans are pretty awesome. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, we also kind of fucking suck sometimes. But like what I'm trying to say is that we really need to try hard to preserve the diversity of ideas, of people, of thoughts, of creeds, of everything.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're fucked. I mean, we're kind of probably fucked anyways, but that's just my millennial negativity talking. So
thanks for checking out this clip from our show.
To watch more clips or full episodes, click on our profile below.
If you want to stay up to date on all of our new episodes and videos, click subscribe.
And if you have any ideas for future guests or topics that you would like to see us cover on the show,
leave us a message in the comments or connect with us on any of our social media channels at Funtime Program.
Or on our website at funtimeprogram.com.
We'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.